We'll start as usual with some prayers, and then we'll do some meditation. And I thought to lead a meditation on the topic that we looked at last week, which has goes by different names, the 4 supreme strivings, or the 4 perfect abandonments, the 4 perfect endeavors. There's different names for it, but you'll probably remember once we get into it. So these are 4 aspects of practice that are very important for us. And so we'll look at how we can start working on those now, even though they are kind of high practices. It's said that the full attainment of these is on the path of accumulation, but we have to start now. And so we can look at how to do that. Okay, so while reciting the prayers, it's good if you can to imagine in front of you the figure of the Buddha, completely made of light, golden light, and wearing the saffron robes of a monk, sitting on a very beautiful throne made of precious materials, and on top of it is a lotus, sun, and moon forming the seat on which the Buddha is sitting. And all those things he's sitting on represent his amazing enlightened qualities. And his right hand is touching the earth, recalling the time right before enlightenment when the Buddha called on the earth goddess, to attest to his sincere practice for a very long time and his right to attain the state of awakening. And then the left hand holds in his lap a bowl containing medicinal healing nectar that clears away our confusion and our delusions, our afflictions. And his face is peaceful, smiling, with an expression showing his pure, unconditional love and compassion for each one of us and for every other living being throughout the universe, without excluding any living being, even the tiniest creature, even those who are doing really terrible things, acting in very deluded ways and causing a lot of suffering and harm and problems for others. So even beings like that, the Buddha is able to look at them with compassion and love, understanding that they are suffering too, they are confused, and he's totally dedicated to helping each and every one of us. Will never abandon any of us, will never give up on us, and is willing to take however long it takes for us to completely purify our minds of all obscurations and bring our minds to this state of enlightenment. So he's there helping us, guiding us in whatever way he can until every one of us, reaches enlightenment. So have the feeling Buddha is someone we can rely upon. We can take as a reliable guide and a worthy guide, having freed his mind of all that is negative, and perfected all that is positive, and showing us the way that we can do that as well. And while taking refuge, you might like to imagine all other sentient beings sitting around taking refuge along with you, getting the benefit of this practice along with you. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence, and turn a wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Gururat Mandala Kamniya. So we'll recite the mantra of the Buddha 7 times. And while doing this, you can imagine light flowing from the figure of the Buddha in front of you. And it flows into you, completely fills your entire body and mind, purifying all negative energy like negative karma, afflictions, obscurations. And it also nourishes the positive potential lying within the mind, all the good qualities that we have, so that they can grow, increase, and bring us closer to enlightenment. Taya ta om mune mune maha mune soha. 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 Tayata Om Mune Mune Mahamanaye Soha. Tayata Om Mune Mune Mahamanaye Soha. So make sure you're sitting comfortably with the back straight and your body as relaxed and free of tension as possible. And let your mind be free of thoughts of the past, things you did earlier today, yesterday, and so on, as well as thoughts of the future, plans for what you're going to do later, tonight, tomorrow, next week, and so on. So leave aside all those thoughts and just let your mind be in the present moment, right here, right now. You can observe the breath flowing in and out for a few minutes. That really helps to settle the mind down in the present. And then bring into your mind the positive motivation, the bodhicitta motivation you generated earlier today, wanting to reach Buddhahood for the benefit of all living beings. If you didn't already generate such a motivation, you can do that now to make sure that this meditation that we're doing, as well as this class we are doing, will be a cause for our attainment of enlightenment and will be as beneficial as possible for all sentient beings from now until enlightenment. So, let's do some meditation on the 4 supreme strivings, which are part of the 37 harmonies with enlightenment, so that we can understand them better and see how we can start practicing them now. So the first supreme striving is preventing the arisal of non-virtues that have not arisen. So think of a non-virtuous thought or non-virtuous action that isn't in your mind right now, but it could arise later. Might be something that you experienced before, something you're familiar with. It's not there right now, but it could happen again. And now generate the aspiration to prevent it from arising, to keep your mind free of that thought or action. And then contemplate how you can make effort towards that, how you can put your energy into preventing that from arising. And then arouse your energy and decide to hold your mind firmly to that goal of not letting that thought arise in your mind, and steadfastly place your mind on that goal of preventing that non-virtue from arising. And then the second supreme striving is abandoning non-virtues that have already risen. So think of a situation where a non-virtuous thought or attitude, like attachment, anger, or jealousy, has arisen in your mind. You can just imagine that kind of situation. And then generate the aspiration to overcome that negative attitude, to free your mind from it, based on good reasons for doing so. Not just because the Buddha said so, but because you really understand how important it is to keep your mind free of non-virtue. So that aspiration to overcome it should give you energy to do something. So contemplate how you can apply effort to overcome this non-virtuous thought. Hold your mind firmly to that aim and steadfastly place your mind to subdue that thought. Then the third supreme striving is to generate virtues not yet generated. So think of a virtuous quality that you would like to have but do not yet have. And generate the aspiration to develop this quality based on good reasons for doing so. And that aspiration should energize you to make effort towards that goal. And decide to hold your mind firmly and steadfastly place your mind to generate that quality or that realization. And then the fourth supreme quality is maintaining virtues that you already have. So think of a virtuous quality or way of behaving that is already part of you, part of your life, and generate the aspiration to maintain this attitude and quality or behavior, understanding how important it is, how valuable it is. And it would be a great tragedy if you were to lose it, if it were to degenerate. So really generate the attitude of wanting to keep that quality as part of you as much as possible. And then think of how you can apply effort and energy to accomplish this, to make sure that you don't lose this quality, you maintain it, and you develop it so that it grows even more, becomes even more expansive and more powerful and more pure. So feel that you now have new tools you can apply to help you become the kind of person you would like to be. Okay, so we can now move on in our exploration of the 37 harmonies. So if we could have the slides on the screen. So this is just a repeat of the 7 groups of the 37 harmonies. So they're divided into these 7 groups. So again, the 37 harmonies are different practices. I think mostly they're mental states of mind that we cultivate. And the reason they're called harmonies with enlightenment is because they help us attain enlightenment. So hearers and solitary realizers and bodhisattvas, all 3 types of practitioners need to cultivate these. Okay, so far we've only covered the first 2 groups, and tonight we'll start looking at the 3rd group, which are called the 4 legs of magical emanation. And on the chart it says, these are the path that is thoroughly trained in meditative concentration. And the full attainment of these occurs on the great level of the path of accumulation. So that's the 3rd and final level of the path of accumulation. So the next slide, we start looking at these in detail. So there's different ways of translating these 4. The word translated as leg in one version or base in another version. In Sanskrit, it's pada, and in Tibetan, it's kangpa. And so that word can mean foot or leg, but it can also mean base or foundation. So you got a lot to choose from when you're translating these from Tibetan. And I was thinking too, this Sanskrit term pada, which means foot or leg, it sounds kind of similar to the Latin and the Greek words for foot. Like in Latin, it's ped, and Greek is pod. And those are the bases for English words like pedal, pedestrian, podiatrist. So maybe long ago there was some connection between Sanskrit and Greek in that word. Anyway, so what these are, the first bullet point is a kind of a simplified definition. These are meditative stabilizations or concentrations, samten in Tibetan. So they are the mental factor. That's a mental factor. Whether you want to translate it as meditative stabilization or concentration. So it's one of the mental factors. So that's their nature. They're that mental factor. And they're in the mind of someone on a path. So that means it's not an ordinary, everybody kind of person, but someone who's attained at least the path of accumulation. So it could be a hearer or a solitary realizer or a bodhisattva who has at least attained that first path, the path of accumulation. And so it's not just ordinary concentration, but a highly developed form of concentration. And then it says they are supported on the 8 antidotes to the 5 faults. So you've probably heard an explanation of those before in the instructions on how to cultivate calm abiding or serenity. There are these 5 faults that we have to overcome to develop calm abiding, and 8 antidotes to those. So we'll look at those later to refresh our memory. But first, let's look at this term magical emanation or spiritual power. So the second bullet point says that these 4 legs or bases are bases for attaining spiritual powers, such as emanating one's body, flying, walking on water, passing through walls or mountains, becoming invisible. Sounds like science fiction, doesn't it? So, yeah, you might be surprised to learn that Buddhism contains methods for developing these abilities. So it means that, Jesus wasn't the only person in the world who could ever walk on water. Buddhism and probably Hinduism as well knows about these powers and knows how to develop them. And they can be developed on the basis of super strong concentration. So you have to have really, really good concentration. And then on the basis of that, you can develop these abilities. And for Buddhist, somebody following the Buddhist path, one should only use these abilities in beneficial ways for one's own practice and for the benefit of others. So earlier in the Ornament for Clear Realization, this subject of the 37 harmonies comes in chapter 4, but in chapter 1 of the Ornament, there's an explanation of 6 clairvoyances or super knowledges. And these are actually consciousnesses attained in dependence on an actual concentration, a jhana. So having attained at least the first jhana, then one can develop these 6 clairvoyances or super knowledges. So I'll just briefly mention these for your interest. The first one is called magical emanation. And so with this one, you can move the earth. That means we don't need big machines. For those of you watching online, we're in the middle of this construction project to build a new meditation hall since last July. So there's all these big machines coming up, and they're digging the earth and bringing materials and pouring concrete and so on. So I was just thinking, yeah, we could just sit alongside the edge of the building site, and just with our mental abilities, our magical abilities, we could move the earth, dig the earth, and move the bricks and so on. Anyway, we don't have, most of us, I think, don't have that ability, but that would be cool if you could. And another thing included in this first type of clairvoyance is being able to emanate many forms, so you can multiply forms of yourself. And I think you can also manifest different forms. You can, I think they call it shape shifting in popular culture. That you can, create these images of animals or different kinds of people or whatever. Yeah, so that's included in the first clairvoyance. And the other night I was listening to a talk that was given by Ajahn Brahm, explaining one Pali Sutra that I wanted to understand. And he mentioned an occasion during the Buddha's life, when a laywoman made a large donation to the Sangha, and they used it to build a hall. And the monks themselves did the work. And Modgaliana was in charge of the construction, and he was renowned for his psychic powers. And so this building was built very quickly, just with his mind. He could lift bricks and place them. So that'd be really cool, because those Foswell bricks are quite heavy. So to be able to do it with the mind. Anyway, so that's the first of the 6. And the second is called divine ear. And with this, you are able to hear sounds throughout the world system, not just this planet, but many, many planets. And my guess is this is something you can shut off. I would think so. I would hope so. Otherwise, you'd be constantly hearing all the music and the traffic and the gossip and the hate speech and the explosions from bombs and so on. So that wouldn't be very nice. So I guess if you wish to, you can tune into sounds from other places, know what's going on. And the third is the clairvoyance of knowing others' minds. So being able to understand what's happening in another's mind. And this is useful to be able to know where somebody is at, like, which afflictions they have, or which afflictions they don't have, which realizations they have and they don't. So it would be, help you. If you want to help people, you want to teach people, this would enable you to know what's the best way to teach them. And the fourth one is recalling past lives, both your own and others. So this will be very helpful. For example, just to have conviction in rebirth. A lot of people have trouble believing in reincarnation, rebirth. So if you have your own firsthand experience of that, then that helps you to have more conviction in the Buddha's teachings and the whole teachings about karma and samsara and so on. But it would also be helpful in understanding other people and why they are the way they are, why they're experiencing what they're experiencing, and so on, and enable you to help them better. And the fifth is the divine eye. And this enables you to see things that are far away, even, it says, throughout the whole world system. So this is like, we do sometimes hear stories about people who have this ability to see, they call it remote viewing. They can be in one place and know something in another place, even though they're, it's far away, or there may be many barriers between where they are in that place. Also ESP, they used to call it ESP. Yeah, so Buddhism knows about this. It knows how you can develop it. Anybody can develop that. And the sixth of the clairvoyances or super knowledges is called the exhaustion of contaminations. And this is something that only Buddhas and Arhats have. So it means you're completely free from, in the case of Arhats, they are free of all the afflictive obscurations. And in the case of the Buddha, they're free of all, not just afflictive obscurations, but also the knowledge obscurations or cognitive obscurations to omniscience. So that's something ordinary beings or non-Buddhas, non-Arhats cannot have. But ordinary beings can have the first five. And in fact, to have those first five, you don't even have to be on a path. You don't even have to be a Buddhist. As long as you develop really good concentration and a jhana, then you can have those qualities. So it's important to know that, because sometimes people, you might meet some kind of teacher or practitioner or yogi, and maybe this person shows that they can read your mind, or they have some kind of special abilities, and you may think, oh, wow, this person must be a Buddha. No, just having these abilities doesn't mean that you're enlightened. In fact, you could be very deluded. I heard some awful stories. Well, the worst story I heard was this young Western couple was in India, and I guess they were walking somewhere in the hills, and they encountered a sadhu, Indian sadhu. And it seems that this sadhu had some kind of powers, because the young man became paralyzed. He couldn't move. And he had to watch as this sadhu raped his girlfriend. So that's a clear case of misuse of these kind of powers. So it shows, you can still be very deluded, have, attachment and greed and animosity and so on, and of course ignorance, and still have these powers. So don't be fooled, by somebody having powers. They still may not be someone you can trust, you can rely upon. But bodhisattvas, it's said in the Ornament that bodhisattvas do need to develop all of these powers. The reason is for their own practice, to be able to complete the practices that they need to do to reach enlightenment, and also to benefit others. And when bodhisattvas develop and use these powers, they understand them to be only conventionally existing, but not ultimately. They're empty of ultimate existence or true existence. So anyway, that's just a list of the 6 types of clairvoyance or super knowledge. And again, those can be developed by those who are not yet on a path. But here, it's talking about someone who is on a path, at least the path of accumulation. And these are actually the concentrations, the very strong states of concentration that are the basis for having those powers, enabling you to develop those powers and use them. Does that make sense? And the last point says, these powers are used to enhance one's practice and benefit others. So it said that, Buddhist practitioners, even if they have these powers, they shouldn't display them just for impressing people, fame, reputation, money. Like we hear stories of magicians, illusionists, playing these tricks. I wonder sometimes if some of them may actually have these powers. I don't know, possible. But yeah, so in the case of a Buddhist practitioner, they're using them only to help their own practice, to further their practice, their development, or to help sentient beings. So just an example, the term leg, pada or leg, just as our legs take us places, with these 4 concentrations, one can emanate many bodies and go to many Buddha lands to hear teachings from and make offerings to a multitude of Buddhas. So that's an example of how you could use these powers to develop your own practice. You can emanate many forms of yourself and go to Sukhavati Pure Land and Tushita Pure Land and all these different Pure Lands and listen to the Buddha's teachings and make offerings to them and create a lot of merit. So, yeah, do all kinds of good things with these powers. Okay, so now we'll look at what the 4 actually are. This is just a general explanation. So the actual 4 legs are first the leg of magical emanation of aspiration. And this refers to qualities associated with concentration attained through aspiration and vigorous application. So these 4 legs themselves are the mental factor of concentration. Just as like the previous groups that we looked at, the first group was the 4 establishments of mindfulness. And so those are all the mental factor of mindfulness. That's their nature. And then the next group, the 4 supreme strivings. Does anyone remember what mental factor that was? Effort, joyous effort, yeah. It's one of the virtuous mental factors. And here, these are all mainly the mental factor of concentration. Concentration isn't necessarily virtuous. It's actually one of the 5, what do they call it? Object ascertaining mental factors. So on their own, they're neutral. They're not virtuous or non-virtuous. But if they are together with other virtuous mental factors, like in the mind of a bodhisattva, bodhisattvas developing concentration with the aim of reaching enlightenment to help all sentient beings. So it's accompanied with love and compassion and bodhicitta. So in that case, that mental factor of concentration would be virtuous. So anyway, these 4 are all concentration. But then when we go through the 4, they are accompanied by other mental factors. So like the first one is aspiration. So aspiration is another mental factor. It's also an object ascertaining mental factor. So there would be in the mind of the practitioner, the bodhisattva or whatever, there would be a main mind, a mental consciousness, and then that in the retinue of that main mind would be the mental factor of concentration and the mental factor of aspiration. There could be other mental factors as well. There would be definitely other mental factors as well. So this first one, the main mental factor, the additional mental factor is aspiration. And so the book Following in the Buddha's Footsteps by His Holiness and Venerable Children, with regard to this first one, it says, this one includes qualities that are primarily associated with concentration that are attained through intense aspiration to cultivate virtue. So that's the aspiration here. It's the aspiration that wants to cultivate virtue. So that makes me think of the supreme strivings that we looked at just now, having this strong wish to cultivate virtue that hasn't yet been cultivated and to maintain and increase virtue that has already been cultivated. So that kind of aspiration would be together with concentration. And then it also mentions rigorous application. So rigorous application means that in general, virtuous practice can be applied in 2 ways, rigorously and consistently. And so rigorous application is when we practice energetically, but not consistently. So I was trying to think of an example of that. I think we all do this sometimes, there are periods of time where we have a lot of energy to do a certain practice, like maybe meditating on impermanence and death. we want to overcome our attachment. So we, do a lot of meditation on impermanence and death. So we might do that intensely for a few days or a few weeks, and then lose our energy, slack off, and not do that practice for a while. And then later again, we have this intense energy, and then again slack off. Does that sound familiar? Especially when we have a retreat. In a retreat, we have a lot of intense energy to do practice. But then when the retreat ends, we get busy doing other things. Then that energy kind of peters out. So maybe that's the meaning of rigorous application. Okay, so then the second one is the leg of magical emanation of effort or joyous effort. And that's another mental factor. It's a virtuous mental factor. It's also the sixth, one of the six perfections. So that means that mental factor would also be together in the mind along with concentration. And so this one includes the qualities that are primarily associated with concentration and attained through the effort of I wrote it wrong. On the slide it says constant application. It should be consistent application. Consistent application. So that's the other type of application, like when you're practicing, trying to apply antidotes and so on. And so consistent application is smooth, peaceful, and continuous. It's not aggressive, laborious, or tiring. And so with consistent application, we practice steadily, but lack rigor and intensity. So maybe there's times when we practice like that as well. We kind of practice every day, but maybe they're not with really strong energy. It's kind of a little bit slack. It's steady, we keep going, but it lacks rigor and intensity. And so it's said that for our meditation to bear the best results, we need to use both rigorous and consistent effort to apply antidotes and cultivate virtuous qualities. So ideally we need both of those ways of practicing, rigorous and consistent. And I've sometimes heard Tibetan lamas use this analogy. They say that our practice should be like the pace of an elephant, because when an elephant walks, they kind of walk at a steady pace, not very fast, but they keep going, and they can go for a really, really long time, like even the whole day, right? They can just keep walking and walking and walking, probably to get water or food or whatever. But anyway, they can walk at a steady pace, continuously. I don't know if you heard about this, but last year in 2021, there was this group of elephants walking through China, southern China. Apparently they came from a nature reserve in the south, and they just walked out and started walking. They were going through towns and cities and on highways and so on, and they spent a whole year on the move, and nobody understood why, where they were going. Were they looking for food or what? And they went hundreds of miles, and then eventually they stopped and turned around and went back to their nature reserve. But they caused a huge amount of disruption. They had to sometimes evacuate villages and roads, and also destruction, because they eat a lot. So they were, destroying fields, and maybe they got into markets as well, and just but they were a big hit on social media. I guess there were millions of people following them and following their adventures. So anyway, they say the way we practice should be like that, like the elephant walking at a steady but continuous pace, and not be like a rabbit. So the way that a rabbit moves, it can run really fast and then it stops, and then maybe it goes another direction really fast and then it stops, and then so it kind of doesn't get anywhere. Yeah, not consistent and steady. I don't know why. I like that. I like that analogy. I find that really helpful because the idea is, you know, because it does sometimes happen. We have this really strong energy to practice for a little while, but then maybe we wear ourselves out, we get burned out, or we lose energy, and then we don't practice at all for a while. Or so that's not ideal. The ideal thing is, even if you just do a little bit of practice every day, but to keep it up, to make a regular practice of it. And slowly the results will come. So they're more likely, the results are more likely to come if we practice in that way, like the elephant walking, rather than like the rabbit, very disorganized, chaotic. Then the third is the leg of magical emanation of intention. And so this includes qualities attained primarily associated with concentration, attained through familiarization and having previously practiced concentration. So in following the Buddha's footsteps, it says, someone may have miraculous powers, although he is not engaged in an extensive cultivation of concentration in this life. These powers are the ripening of latencies on the mind stream from having previously developed concentration in previous lives. So this might explain why there are people who seem to have natural, unusual abilities, like clairvoyance, being able to see future events before they happen, or remote viewing. So we do sometimes hear stories, maybe even meet people who have these kind of abilities, and they may not have done meditation in this life. They just have these abilities. So, so it could be that they did practice meditation, they did develop concentration in past lives, and they still have that ability brought over into this life. So some years ago, I heard about this book called Extraordinary Knowing, written by Elizabeth Lloyd Meyer, a psychologist in Berkeley. And she got interested in this topic after her daughter had this harp, a little hand-carved harp that was stolen. And she was, desperately trying to retrieve it. And somebody suggested that she ask a dowser. Dowser are people who find water. They're able to find water underground using rods or whatever. So apparently dowsers can also find missing objects, really good ones. So she got in touch with this dowser, and he helped her find the daughter's harp. He actually, even though he was in Arkansas and she was in California, and I don't think he'd never even been to California, but he sent her an address, a street address of a house in Oakland. And she couldn't actually go and knock on the door and say, hey. So she put up signs in the neighborhood, like people do when they lose a cat or a dog. So she just put up these signs within a couple of blocks of that house, and offering a reward for anybody who's found this harp. And so she got a phone call, and they arranged to meet in a parking lot somewhere. And so she got the daughter's harp back. But she was just like, how did that guy know? So it just got her really interested in this phenomenon. And then she started talking to other psychologists and psychiatrists and found many of them had similar stories with their patients and so on. Just people knowing things that they shouldn't know or not being able to explain how they know things. So she spent about 14 years doing research and then writing this book. So anyway, this kind of phenomena does exist, although I guess a lot of people, a lot of scientists and other kinds of people will just poo-poo it and say, oh, it's just a fraud, it's just coincidence, it's not true. So there's a lot of skeptics. But apparently the United States government back in the 70s and 80s spent quite a bit of money on a research project on remote viewing, because it seems that their reason was they heard that the Soviets were doing it. And I think they were worried that, okay, if the Soviets are doing this, then they can find out all our secrets. So is it really true? Is that really possible? They wanted to know if there was such a threat. So that's why they looked into it. And apparently there were some good results to this research, but still many people were skeptical of it. Anyway, so that's just a side trip. But yeah, the point there is that having practiced concentration in the past, having trained one's mind in that way, then it's possible to develop qualities on the basis of that. The fourth is the miracle leg, the leg of magical emanation of analysis. So this includes qualities primarily associated with concentration achieved through others sharing their discriminating analysis. So for example, somebody may teach a practitioner how to do a certain meditation practice, and the second person examines these instructions, practices them, and gains single-pointed concentration. So it's on the basis of someone else. Let's misspell discriminating there. I wasn't very discriminating when I typed this. Yeah, so on the basis of someone else's sharing their knowledge, having analyzed, practiced that themselves, then they share it with us. So yeah, so for example, if we learn instructions on how to develop calm abiding or serenity from our teachers, and we practice them, and then we develop really good concentration. So whatever qualities come along with that concentration, that would be included in this fourth one. And in the book Following the Buddha's Footsteps, it gives an example of how these four are practiced when one is training to make a manifestation. So if you have this power, this ability to create a manifestation, maybe you want to make an elephant, create an image of an elephant. So first you have the aspiration to do this, to make this manifestation. And then that arouses the effort to do it. You have to make some effort to accomplish this. And then that leads to the intention, number 3, that draws the mind to the object. Intention is the mental factor that draws the mind or focuses the mind on the object. And then to analysis of the instructions. Okay, so what do I have to do? How do I do this? So that would be the fourth one. So all 4 of these powerful concentrations are present when a manifestation is made. Okay. So it sounds like maybe, for me anyway, this is further along than where I'm at now, because we first have to develop calm abiding, really good concentration, and then on the basis of that, be able to have these 4 legs. So let's look at the 5 faults and the 8 antidotes, which we've probably all heard before, but since this is a big part of developing concentration, these are things we have to know and do if we do want to develop our ability to keep our mind focused, concentrated. And then these are, again, the 8 antidotes mentioned here are the basis or the support for the concentration that we need to be able to engage in those powers. So the first fault is laziness. And there's different kinds of laziness, but in the context of calm abiding, it refers to just like not really wanting to meditate, just having a reluctance to meditate. And that's not, that can happen because to develop calm abiding, you need to spend a lot of time keeping your mind focused on your chosen object, whether it's image of the Buddha or the breath or loving kindness, whatever. So there's always an object that you choose, and then you train your mind to stay on that object and bring your mind back to that object whenever it wanders away. So you're looking at hours and hours, thousands, millions of hours keeping your mind focused on that one object, and it can be boring. Yeah. And so it's understandable that laziness comes up, that, maybe in the beginning you're so enthusiastic, yes, I'm going to get calm abiding. But, after a few days, after a few weeks, after a few months, it's like, it becomes hard work. And so this attitude of laziness is, I don't really want to do this. And so there's 5 antidotes to laziness. Did I say 5? 4 antidotes. Sorry, 4 antidotes to laziness. The first is faith. And here, faith doesn't mean like faith in the Buddha, but faith in calm abiding, faith in that ability. Having understood the benefits, there's a lot of good that comes out of having calm abiding or serenity. Just, for example, you feel good, you feel really blissful in your body and your mind, so you get immediate benefit. And having that ability, you can focus your mind on whatever you want, and ideally virtuous objects, not non-virtuous ones. But yeah, you can keep your mind focused on virtuous objects and keep your mind away from non-virtuous ones that might trigger your attachment and your aversion and so on. So you can really control your mind. And then you can attain different powers like the ones we just went through. But most importantly, we need calm abiding to be able to gain the direct realization of emptiness. Without calm abiding, no way can we attain that direct realization of emptiness. And that is essential to be able to eliminate the obscurations that prevent liberation and enlightenment. So it's an absolute must for progressing on the path and attaining the goals of liberation and enlightenment. So you learn about these, you contemplate these, and then that gives rise to faith in calm abiding or serenity as a good thing, something really good for you. And then faith leads to the next antidote, which is aspiration. So if you have that faith, naturally you have the aspiration to attain calm abiding. And that in turn will lead to effort, having joyous effort to practice, or you're happy to be able to sit down and meditate. You see it's good for you, it's good for me, it's good for everybody, it'll help me get enlightened and so on. So then you do it, you do the practice, and if you keep doing the practice, eventually you will progress through the 9 stages and attain pliancy. So the 4th antidote is pliancy. And pliancy is actually a mental factor, but it brings very pleasant, relaxed feelings in the body and the mind. By that time, you've overcome some of the more coarse kinds of negative tendencies, dysfunctional tendencies, and it just becomes really easy to meditate. Yeah, you don't have to make much effort to sit down and meditate and go into a state of concentration. So it's said that number 4, pliancy, is the actual antidote to laziness, because once you have pliancy, laziness is finished. No more laziness. You're happy to meditate. But to be able to get to that point, then you need the first 3, faith, aspiration, and effort. And then the second fault is forgetfulness. And that doesn't just mean forgetting people's names, forgetting where you put your car keys, but forgetting your meditation object. So, we sit down and we say, okay, I'm going to focus on the Buddha or on my breath. But after a few seconds or maybe a few minutes, then we've forgotten that object and we're thinking about something else, doing something else. So that's the meaning of forgetfulness. Forgetfulness can also mean forgetting the instructions, what we're supposed to do. So ideally, we've learned how to practice, how to develop calm abiding, and what we need to do in different circumstances, what we need to do with different faults and so on. So, so we need to learn very well the way to practice, but then we need to keep those in mind, keep in mind the instructions so that we know what to do when it needs to be done. So the antidote to forgetfulness is mindfulness. So we've looked at mindfulness before when we went through the 4 establishments of mindfulness, but just to refresh our memories. So mindfulness is a mental factor that focuses on a familiar object, an object that we already know, and it keeps the mind on the object without forgetting it. So it's like the opposite to forgetfulness. Mindfulness is remembering the object. Forgetfulness is forgetting the object. So they're totally opposite to each other. And then mindfulness keeps the mind on the object so that it doesn't wander away, get distracted to other objects. So we do have mindfulness to a certain extent, but we need to develop it. We need to build it up, strengthen it, make our minds more familiar with it. So that's a big part. This is one of the main mental factors needed to develop calm abiding. Because we're training our mind, we're trying to train our mind to stay focused on one single object. And so mindfulness is, they say it's like, they use the analogy, if you're taming a wild animal, like a wild horse or a wild elephant, you need a rope to tie the animal to a post or a stake so it doesn't run away. It wants to run away, so you got to keep it there. So mindfulness is like the rope that keeps the mind tied to the object so that the mind gets more and more and more and more familiar with that object and with staying with that object. And eventually it's able to stay on the object as long as you want without ever wandering away. So mindfulness is a key element in that. Then a third fault is actually 2 in 1. laxity and excitement. And so these are actually the main faults once you do get yourself down, sitting down to meditate and focusing on your object. Laxity and excitement are things that prevent the development of concentration, calm abiding. So laxity is, well, there's two levels. The first we encounter is gross laxity. So that's when our mind is on the object. It's actually staying on the object, but there's a lack of clarity. The object isn't appearing in a very clear way. So that's gross laxity. And I think it's actually subtle. I think it's not something you have to deal with so much in the beginning when you're first trying to concentrate, but it's more later once you do have some stability on the object. But then there may be this kind of bit sinking. And then subtle laxity is a subtler form of laxity, and that's when you do have stability on the object, and there's also clarity, it's appearing clearly, but there's a lack of vivid intensity. And I'm not completely sure what that means, that expression, but the way I think of it is like if you're using binoculars or a telescope and you're trying to see something off in the distance, and you have to adjust the, what do you call it, the lens, so that it appears clearly. So the way I think of vivid intensity is when you get it adjusted just perfectly so that the object is like really, really super clear. That's my guess. But yeah, I think we have to practice this and experiment with it to understand it. So it said that laxity happens because the mind has lost a little of its energy. The energy is kind of slackened off. So it's relaxed. The mind is relaxed the strength of its hold on the object. It's not holding the object so strongly. So that's how laxity happens. And then excitement, this is the one we'll probably have to deal with in the beginning. That also has two levels, gross and subtle. So gross excitement happens because of attachment. Our mind gets distracted to objects that we're attached to. So gross excitement is when our mind just totally goes off, leaves the object, our meditation object, and goes to something else. Movie that we saw last week, or the music that we listened to, or some food we want to eat. So some object of attachment, our mind gets distracted by that. So that's gross excitement. And then subtle excitement happens later, when you're able to keep your mind on the object so that it doesn't run away completely. But there's this underlying, like maybe some thoughts or something starting to bubble up that could cause your mind to get distracted. So you're still focused on the object, but some other things going on, thoughts or attachment or whatever. So the mind is starting to move to something attractive. So as we're practicing to develop calm abiding, we encounter these different obstacles. We need to be able to recognize them. And so the antidote to both of these is introspective awareness, sometimes called vigilance. It's actually a kind of wisdom or intelligence that is watching the mind and is able to detect what's going on so that it can notice, there's excitement, there's gross excitement, there's subtle excitement, there's gross laxity, subtle laxity. So it has the ability to notice when one of the faults is taking place. And it knows, no, that's wrong, that's a fault, that's something I need to take care of. So it's said that when our mindfulness is strong, introspective awareness just arises naturally. It's like a byproduct of mindfulness. It's the one that's compared to the spy, the internal spy, good spy, not as a bad spy. And then number 4, the fault number 4 is non-application. So what that means is if one of these faults, like laxity or excitement, has occurred and you don't do anything about it, you just let it happen. You're not applying antidotes. The meaning is not applying antidotes when they should be applied. And so I like to think of the analogy of, let's say you're a parent and your child is supposed to do their homework, but instead they're goofing off or watching TV or playing computer games. And you notice that, and you don't do anything. You don't see anything. You just, who cares? So then the child develops this very bad habit, and then they'll have problems in school. So that's a bit like non-application. There's a problem to our meditation, a fault happening, and we're not taking care of it. So that's like bad meditation. We're not going to get to calm abiding in that way. So the antidote for this is application, meaning applying the antidotes. We need to apply the appropriate antidotes when there is a fault in the mind. And so if the fault is excitement, that's the one we're probably going to encounter in the initial stages. It said excitement happens because we're trying too hard. We're pushing ourselves too hard, or we're being too tight, like that. So then the mind gets excited. So they say kind of relax, loosen your concentration a little bit. Don't try so hard. That might help. If that doesn't help, then other methods you can use to sort of sober your mind. Like they say, put aside your meditation object for a little while and remember impermanence and death or karma, something that kind of brings down the excitement. You'd also focus on the breathing. That's a really good way of calming the mind down, calming down the excitement. So yeah, there's different antidotes to excitement. But they say if none of those work, then it's good to just take a short break, maybe do some physical work, some physical exercise, relax a little while, and then try again. And for laxity, that happens because the mind has become too withdrawn, kind of sunk into itself. So one antidote is to brighten the object, like make the object really light and bright, or maybe very expanded. So that might help. Or if that doesn't work, one could contemplate topics that would uplift the mind, uplift the energy, like precious human life. Remind yourself of precious human rebirth, the qualities of the Buddha, something positive and uplifting and energizing to get your energy back up. So those are some of the antidotes. And if those don't work, then they say, again, take a break. And it's good to look out over a distance. Like here we have a great place because you can see this wonderful view over many miles. Look up at the sky, splash cold water on your face. Do things to revive your energy. So those are things to deal with laxity. So anyway, the point is to observe our mind, notice when one of the faults occurs, and do something about it. Don't just let it be, otherwise you develop bad habits. The last fault, 5th one, is over-application. So what that means is you keep applying antidotes even when there's nothing to apply them to, like there's no faults, and you're still using the antidotes. So I think of that as like the analogy of the parent. Maybe the kid is now doing their homework, but the parent comes in and says, now you make sure you do your homework. So it's probably not going to go down very well. Yeah. So once, the fault is gone and the mind is doing well and it's focusing on the object, then let go. Don't keep using the antidote. So I think this is something quite subtle, and you have to actually try it. Try doing calm abiding practice to make sense of it. And so the antidote for this one is equanimity. So equanimity, there's different meanings of equanimity. It doesn't mean the equanimity as in the four measurable thoughts, but rather it's equanimity, which is a virtuous mental factor. And it's explained as not allowing the mind to be greatly affected by agitation or excitement and laxity without having to exert great effort to prevent them. So it just allows your mind to be, letting your mind be without applying antidotes. Just letting the mind settle down and remain on your object. Yeah. So it's said to mainly occur on the 9th stage of calm abiding. So that's like almost to the end, but it might be present before. So, so anyway, that's just a rundown of these 5 faults and 8 antidotes. So the 4 legs of magical emanation that we were just looking at are based on having cultivated these 8 antidotes and having overcome the 5 faults. So I think that by the time you have these 4 legs of magical emanation, you've spent a lot of time working on your concentration, and you've probably got the 5 faults very much under control. The 8 antidotes are very strong and well functioning. And then just a little bit from the Pali tradition. So in the Pali tradition, no, not yet. Not go back. Yeah, so they also explain these 4 legs or 4 bases. For example, in the Samyutta Nikaya. And so here's just a brief way that they're explained in the Pali tradition from the following in the Buddha's footsteps. Actually, maybe go back to the previous slide where we got the 4 legs. Yeah. So the first one, aspiration, is a deep desire or wish to attain spiritual powers, and it fuels a practitioner's efforts to attain samadhi. So that's how it's explained in the Pali tradition. The leg of magical emanation of aspiration is having this strong aspiration to attain these powers, and that gives energy to the practitioner's efforts to attain samadhi, concentration. And then the second one, effort. Through emphasizing effort, a practitioner cultivates the concentration that leads to spiritual powers. So first they have the aspiration, and then they put effort into doing it, developing the concentration. For the third one, it doesn't mention intention, but rather mind. It says another practitioner may emphasize calming their mind, making it tranquil, pure, and radiant. And this gentle but firm approach brings clarity of mind. And through this, one gains the concentration that is a basis for spiritual attainments. So it sounds like that kind of person emphasizes more calm, tranquil mind as a way to generate the concentration and then attain the spiritual powers. And then the fourth leg of magical emanation, analysis or investigation, here it's called investigation. This examines the mind and what factors promote and hinder its development. So what you're investigating is your mind and understanding the different factors in your mind, which ones help with the cultivation of concentration, which ones hinder. Then it says, once concentration is attained by means of aspiration, effort, mind, or investigation, together with the volitional formations of striving, it can be combined with wisdom and used to attain liberation. So that's the real goal, of course. The purpose for a Buddhist practitioner is not just developing concentration and powers, but attaining liberation, either nirvana or enlightenment. And concentration and these different powers are a means to that end. So that's the real goal, the real aim. And then it says, aspiration, effort, a receptive and clear mind, and investigation, these four legs, these four qualities, are useful traits in our daily life as well. They facilitate our ability to attain the goals that we seek. So, for example, if somebody wants to attain a university degree or learn a certain profession, like becoming a plumber or making a trip, even just going to the supermarket to buy some things, then it's useful to have these four qualities of aspiration. You have to want whatever it is you're aiming for. And then the effort, putting your energy into it. And then intention, focusing your mind on that. And analysis, sometimes you need to analyze or investigate what you're doing and making sure you do it right and do it well and accomplish your goal. So even in our daily life, wanting to accomplish some goal, these different qualities are useful. But when your goal is spiritual, then these four legs support the concentration that has the power to go to the depth of the truth and bring liberation. So that's the real goal for a Buddhist practitioner, attaining liberation, attaining enlightenment. And I think magical powers are optional. In the case of bodhisattvas, like in the sutra path, it is said that bodhisattvas following sutrayana do have to develop magical powers. They talk about them in Tantra as well. Reciting mantras is a means to attaining certain powers, abilities. But I think that for the attainment of nirvana, here, solitary realizer attaining nirvana, I don't think it's absolutely necessary to attain these powers. But if we want to reach enlightenment, we want to help sentient beings, then it's very useful. So I think for a bodhisattva, following the bodhisattva path, this is part of it. So this is something we look forward to. Sometime in the future, we will have good concentration, and on the basis of that, develop these different powers. But again, we have to really make sure that our motivation is right. I think sometimes people get into meditation, want to do meditation to attain these powers. That's their goal, and not really sure why they want to attain them. Maybe just for the thrill of it, or to be able to use them in some kind of unwholesome way. One time I was teaching. It was in Malaysia. Just teaching a weekend course. I can't remember what the topic was, something to do with the mind. And after the first session on the Saturday morning, I stopped and I let people ask questions. And this one man put up his hand and he said something like, so are you gonna explain how to do astral travel? It's like, no, that wasn't my intention. Where'd you get that idea? And he said, well, that's why I came here. I mean, if you're not going to talk about that, then I'm not going to stay. So it's like, what? I can't remember what I said to him, but that was his whole purpose. His whole purpose was to learn about astral travel. And I may have talked about it. I may have asked him a little bit, like, why do you want to do that? Like, what's the point? What's the benefit? But anyway, people hear these stories and maybe movies and books, and I don't know, there's kind of all kinds of stuff out there about these different abilities that people have. And so people get excited. Yeah, I want to do that too. But what is the reason? What is their motivation? Is it something wholesome? Is it altruistic? Do they really want to benefit others? It's questionable. So that's why I'm really grateful for the teachers that I have met, and how and their emphasis on bodhicitta, compassion, altruism, helping all sentient beings. That needs to be our motivation for everything we do. And then it becomes wholesome. So even if we do have these powers, we will not use them in any kind of harmful way or any kind of egotistical way, like with 8 worldly dharmas. We'll only use them in a way that's beneficial to others and brings us closer to enlightenment. So, any questions about any of this? We use the microphone so people can hear.
Venerable, so what you have explained, these powers, as you said, it is in the path of accumulation. So is this previous to the first bhumi? Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, the path of accumulation is the first of the 5 paths. And the first bodhisattva bhumi starts with the 3rd path, the path of seeing. So yeah, so for bodhisattva will develop these powers, these abilities on the first path before the first bhumi. Yeah, because there's 5 paths: path of accumulation, path of preparation, path of seeing, path of meditation, path of no more learning. And then the bhumis, 10 bhumis, they start with the 3rd path, path of seeing. So that the 10 bhumis go over the 3rd path, path of seeing, and the 4th path, path of meditation. And then the 5th path is Buddhahood. You're there. Does that make sense?
Yes, I was just curious because it's quite, of course, not the beginning because you need that concentration, but the mind doesn't necessarily need to be very, very purified, right?
Very purified. Well, I mean, right from the very first path, the path of accumulation, the person is a bodhisattva. And that means they have spontaneous, uncontrived bodhicitta. So they've been working a long time to cultivate compassion and love, and of course, do a lot of purification of negative energy. So they haven't yet abandoned any of the negative attitudes, but they're pretty much under control, so that they have bodhicitta just spontaneously with everything that they do. So that's from the very beginning of the first path. So yeah, I think your mind definitely has to be pretty purified by that point. Yeah.
It's just my misunderstanding because I thought it was first purification, then accumulation, and then I got it wrong. That's why I don't want to create confusion now.
Oh, okay.
So, thank you.
Anyone else? I had prepared material to start on the next group. I don't know if you're if you have the energy to do that. Maybe we could do a little bit. Well, we won't be able to finish completely, but we can finish next week. So the next group of the among the 37 harmonies are called the 5 powers. And I put up the Sanskrit and Tibetan terms because, again, different translators will use different English words for these. So the Sanskrit term is, I don't know how to say it, Indraya. But the Tibetan is Wangpo. And so Wang does have the sense of power. And this, it's the same term for like the 5 sense powers. It can be very confusing. Like we talk about 5 sense powers: the eye sense power, the ear sense power, the nose sense power. And so those are also called Wangpo, or power. But that's different from these 5 powers, because the 5 sense powers are all form. They're all physical, material, although subtle kind of matter. Whereas these 5 powers are minds. These are consciousnesses. And in the book, Following the Buddha's Footsteps, these are translated as faculties. So they're called 5 faculties. That's why it's helpful to know the Tibetan. You can always go back to that and know, okay, you're translating it as this and as that, but that's the meaning, that's the term. So just in general, what these are, a power, and again, this is a power within the 37 harmonies as opposed to some other kind of power, is an exalted knower that is another typo there, that is independently able to generate its result, an Arya path. So it's an exalted knower. That means it's a mind, it's a consciousness, and not just an ordinary mind, but the mind of somebody on a path. Someone who has at least developed uncontrived renunciation, in the case of hearers and solitary realizers, and in the case of bodhisattvas, uncontrived bodhicitta. So it's a highly accomplished person who has this within their mind. And I wasn't sure about the word independently, Rangwang in Tibetan, because, Prasangika says nothing is independent, nothing exists independently. And I couldn't find any explanation of what it means, but just a guess, maybe it means that these minds, these 5 powers, these 5 minds, are just very strong, very powerful, and on their own have the ability to accomplish certain things, such as giving rise to Arya paths. So they lead to the development of realizations of an Arya, an exalted person, someone who's attained the path of seeing. And also another thing about these 5 powers, following in the Buddha's footsteps, says that they have a strong influence to oppose their opposites. So each of these 5 powers has an opposite, another mental factor that's opposite to them and that is unconducive. It's like a hindrance to our practice. And they're called powers because they empower us to attain enlightenment. And then they are paths that prepare for clear realizations. And the full attainment of these is on the path of preparation, the first 2 levels of the path of preparation, the heat and peak. So let's just look at these. Maybe we won't go into detail with them, but on the next slide, just to look at them in case you're curious what these 5 are. There are mental factors. And they're positive, constructive mental factors. So faith, power of faith. This is a conviction about the Four Noble Truths. Power of joyous effort. So that's so both faith and joyous effort are virtuous mental factors. So just on their own, by their own nature, by their own power, they are virtuous. They make our mind virtuous when we have them. And they're explained here mainly with respect to the Four Noble Truths. So faith is as conviction in the Four Noble Truths, meaning you believe them, you accept them, you understand them, and are practicing to abandon suffering and its causes and attain cessation and paths. So you're convinced about that, faith in the Four Noble Truths. And then joyous effort delights in discarding the first two truths, true sufferings and true origins, and then adopting the second true cessations and paths. So you have joyous effort to get rid of suffering and its causes and to attain cessations and paths. And then the power of mindfulness is not forgetting the objects of observation and aspects of the Four Noble Truths. So you have to keep those in mind. You have to keep in mind the Four Noble Truths and the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths, and focus on them and understand them. And so not forgetting those. And then fourth is meditative stabilization or concentration. So this is a single pointed mind focused on the Four Noble Truths without distraction. And then wisdom, power of wisdom, discriminating the mode of abidance of the Four Noble Truths. So I'll go into them more next week, but I just wanted to introduce them tonight, get you excited. I want to come back next week. Okay, so yeah, I think that's probably enough for tonight. Any last questions you can think of? I know for myself, this kind of material can be a little challenging because it seems to be talking about something so far away from where one is at right now. So I think it is helpful to try to look at how in our present practice there are elements, there are aspects of these that we can start to practice and relate to and so on. So that's why, like in the beginning, we did that meditation to see how, those four supreme strivings do play a role in my life and in my practice. I am starting to make at least little baby steps in those four. And if we keep going, keep practicing those, eventually they will become the supreme strivings that are part of the 37 harmonies. And the same with these five powers. These are there in our practice even now. And if we can identify them and appreciate them and put our energy into increasing them, building them up, practicing them, then eventually they will become the powers of ourself as a bodhisattva, a future bodhisattva on the path. So, we have just 2 more classes before the end. We still have quite a few points to go through. Maybe I'll try to shorten them a little bit. So we do the 5 powers. I'll talk a bit more about the 5 powers. And then the 5 strengths are actually the same 5 elements, those same 5 mental factors, but they're stronger. They're more developed. and able to do more. So it won't take too long to go through those. And then there's the 7 Arya qualities. Those are very beautiful. And the Eightfold Path. So we just got 2 weeks to go, but we'll squeeze it in at least a little bit in the next 2 weeks. So maybe we could stop here. I think some people might be tired. Some people have been traveling today and we need to get to bed early. So let's rejoice that we did spend this time together, starting with a good motivation and doing some meditation on these very beautiful, precious topics, the 37 harmonies with enlightenment. And then, trying to learn more about them, understand them better, and aspire to develop them in our practice for attainment of enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. So just whatever effort we've made in this way is definitely beneficial. We've definitely created merit, positive energy, positive potential. So now let's dedicate this positive energy that it will be the cause for our attainment of enlightenment and will help us and help all other sentient beings as much as possible while we are on the way to enlightenment. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Incomparably kind and supreme Tenzin Gyatso, the wish-fulfilling, wish-granting jewel, source of every benefit and happiness in this world, may you have a long life and all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the 3 sublime ones, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. Thank you.